Welcome back. Now, it's been an accelerated year for the millions of learners during the COVID-19 pandemic, whose result we witnessed during the just-released KCPE 2021 results. Yet there is more. The learners are this week completing their KCSE, followed by another packed year 2022 that will yet again subject the learners to a speedy, packed learning schedule. All of this in the midst of rolling out a new curriculum in the name of CBC. A total of 6 major national exams or assessments this year, with a double intake expected in 2023 and a major transition into junior secondary school that will prove to be the first big test of the competency-based curriculum. Tonight, we take a look at the state of education sector in the country, the triumphs over the challenges that the pandemic has posed, the accountability gaps, and yes, the issue of money, financing of the education sector. And also, is CBC widening the gap between the rich and the poor? My guests on Newsnight tonight, Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa, who's the Executive Director of USAWA, Mutheo Kasanga, who's an education expert and Director of Lukenya Schools, joining us virtually. And of course, we also have Dr. John Mugo, who's a renowned education expert and Executive Director of Zizi Afrique Foundation. Let's get the conversation started. You can weigh in as well. The hashtag to use is Newsnight at Citizen TV Kenya and at Yvonne Okwara. Ladies, gentlemen, thank you for joining us on Newsnight tonight. I think I'd like to start off with you, Dr. Mugo. Give us an assessment of where the education sector is. It's been one heck of a time, for learners, teachers, parents, and basically all in the sector. What's it been like considering the result we've just received this week?
Thank you so much, Yvonne, and to all the viewers. First, it's fair to congratulate our children who worked so hard over so many years, and this is a big transition for them. Many of them have done well. Others have not done so well, but I think the failure is not yours alone. It is to blame also to so many others. As you say, I think the education system is on crossroads. When you look at this year, of course, it's been tough through COVID, very short holidays and terms, and really squashed. But I think the system has done well. A lot of resilience is observed, looking at what we've been able to achieve. And because it's COVID was no one's, fault. So I think it's all of us to hold together to make education succeed for our children. This year is extremely tough because when you look at the examinations, 2 examinations in the year, both KCP, KCSE, and the first CBC exam that is expected. For sure, we continue to see, even when we say that KCPE, the 400s have increased, but also those that got below 100 have also increased. So when you look at the middle, I think that reporting the top only does not give us a whole picture. So we have to continue looking at those that don't get even to the 200 marks. And what does it mean? Because every child is entitled to learning. So there are really questions, I think, that are not new. We continue to see this. And the question is, what is it that we can do so that every child who is going to school today gets to learn and benefit from the schooling experience? Yeah,
Dr. Manyasa, there's been a decline in Kcp performance. If you take a look at from 2017 to 2021, we had highs of 455 marks, down to 428 marks. And of course, like Dr. Mugo has said, the COVID-19 pandemic, a packed schedule. But is that, in your view, the only reason for the decline?
Thank you, Yvonne. There are many reasons. We know that Kenya as a country has done well standing up to COVID. If you compare with our neighbors here who closed school for 2 years.
2 years, yes.
Kenya has stood firm to try and make sure that we do not lose time. But if you listen to the global clarion call, it is build back better. It's an acknowledgement that prior to the pandemic, we already had problems. And so when we rebuild, we should not rebuild to where we were before the pandemic. We should rebuild to a better place. It's an admission, and it's global. I think that some of the problems that we are facing in education sector predate the the pandemic. For example, the shortage of teachers in our schools is something that predates the pandemic, is something that has been getting worse as the numbers of learners have continued to increase, and the government has continued to face this constraint in terms of the resources it can put in the education sector, given that the education sector is already the highest single department in the budget. So those are some of the challenges that we have to confront and say, yes, the pandemic has caused many of our problems, but it has only served to expose problems that predate it.
And we'll come back and talk about some of those problems in greater detail and what the possible solutions look like. You mentioned a teacher's shortage. Let's now focus on CBC and that curriculum. There's a major transition coming up, and of course the experience of what that has been like for those in the private school sector. Mudeo, 8 million learners in CBC already, another 1 million learners set to join when the academic calendar resumes in April. Another 1 million will join PP1. What's the experience been like for the rollout of CBC from your perspective?
From my perspective, several things have come into play that have helped the rollout of CBC, and they are not celebrated as much as they should be. For instance, right now the government, the Ministry of Education, distributes textbooks directly to the students, and the ratio is nearly 1-to-1. And from looking at education from a public school side, that is the biggest win of any intervention done. Because traditionally, and before that program started, the issues were that students just didn't have books. Now they have books. And as we roll out this curriculum, that is now even more important. For us in the private sector, of course, now the flip side comes into play, that it is parents who have to foot that tab for resourcing for CBC. And when we look at schools in the urban areas, the high-density urban areas, especially the poorer areas in the urban areas, that becomes a very big challenge. For instance, Kibera, Dagoretti, all these places where there are huge numbers of private schools. Some of the rural schools as well are sort of constrained, and parents sort of stressed because of that. In 2013, we also saw the government start rolling out the digital learning program, and we saw tablets being distributed to schools, in public schools. Again, parents have to put this bill in private schools. So these are some of the challenges that those of us in private schools have to deal with and balance out to make education affordable for parents, because there's no other funding. So education, yes, does receive the biggest budget. And in light of the discussion that we are having now, yes, both sectors do have gaps that that sort of call upon communities to come in together to bridge. As we roll out the new curriculum, as you've said, there are now 8 million children in CBC, another million loading on to CBC. It is no longer now the new curriculum. We have been at it from 2017. And so many cohorts, 6 years, 6 years of CBC now, including the pilot years. So this is now the system we have. It is no longer the new system. It is the system we have. If anything, we have the old system exiting out as the current one rolls in. Speaking from this perspective, I think for us in the private sector, we've been more open for change and more embracing of change, and perhaps that is why you're seeing a few more gains on the private side. That said, we are seeing a lot of innovation coming in through the public side. The CBC emphasizes on children learning within their environment. So learning is very, very domesticated in a way, and therefore innovation is it triggers innovation. When we do the assessments, we are seeing some brilliant work coming in from both public and private schools, and that's amazing. That's amazing. The inclusiveness of CBC, the fact that for the first time in the history of this country, we have a curriculum that caters for kids with diverse needs, special needs, the gifted, and all the other special needs. This is very, very important and is not spoken about enough. And I think some of these things are overshadowed by, for instance, now we are having our KCP discussion. The successes, the quiet successes that are happening in CBC are barely celebrated, and we need to find the forums and the means to celebrate some of these brilliant things happening with CBC.
Okay, Mudeo says a couple of things, some quiet successes that need to be celebrated, and that the private sector has been more embracing of change with this system. It is the system, like she says, where now this is going to be the 7th year, when we begin the 2022 calendar in April. Dr. Mugo, do you agree? Are there some quiet successes that we haven't taken a look at?
Yes, for sure. I think I personally looked forward to a time when we would be bold enough to say that the education that we were giving was not working for our children. I've been looking at statistics around the CBC adoption, and if you talk to teachers randomly, you'll find that around 86% of them say it's working for them. Around 13% say it's not working, and around 1% are not sure. The one thing that the education needed to change was to produce children who think and use their brain. And one of the studies I did earlier on, for instance, was to go to a class randomly, and you look at children who ask the teacher a question unprompted. And if you go randomly to any class, in that other curriculum, you'll find that the teacher was teaching only a few students, the ones who raise up their hand, and the others are just tagging along. So the ignorance of the diversity in children and the fact that we are gifted differently was, I think, the biggest mess that the other curriculum was causing. So this leveling ground by appreciating that if I have this gift or talent, I'm able to come in, is what I have been seeing in CBC. It can be done more. Of course, as Mudeo says, there is a lot to celebrate, but I think there are also challenges that we must admit, that because when we admit there are challenges, then we look for ways of fixing them. And one of these, I think, is a teacher attitude. There are still teachers who have not bought into it because probably they don't understand about it enough. They don't understand the two philosophies of how we were educating before, and why we were educating, and how we are educating now, and why. That I think cannot be blamed on those teachers, because it is our responsibility. There are many parents also, Yvonne, that I think have no clue. They hear there's a new curriculum, but they don't know. And it is our responsibility to also tell them why this is needed and what their role is in making this succeed. So I think the onboarding of parents, the awareness that is there among teachers is still low, and this is what evidence is showing us. And some of this, including, of course, the investment that needs to go in changing the learning environments for it to work for the new curriculum, the capacity of teachers to be able to innovate at the lower, at their level, and use improvise locally developed materials and so on, and use what works in context is what so many teachers are unable to do. I think if we start also looking at these things that are not working well, then we'll together be able to look for a solution that might work for all schools. Okay.
Mudeo said that the private sector has been more embracing of change with the system. Dr. Manyasa, do you see that as a challenge in terms of the difference between how it's being implemented in the private sector versus in the public school system?
I think that the private sector was already set up, excuse me, it was already set up for this kind of change.
How so?
Set up in the sense that if you go to a typical private school, they have smaller class sizes, so they have more teacher-to-pupil ratio, higher pupil-to-teacher ratio, which is what CBC requires. It requires that a teacher is able to pay attention to the details, to the individual child, to identify what that child is able to do. The public sector is set up for mass production. So you have one teacher with so many learners, and it's not set up to implement CBC as we decide, as we have designed it. So that is one of the challenges that you will see still bedeviling the public sector, that the public schools, the pupil-to-teacher ratios are high. Those teachers are feeling overwhelmed, and some of them are finding it difficult to implement CBC as designed. So that is a challenge. The private sector was already set up much better for CBC implementation on that score alone. But secondly, it's also the fact that if you look at the private school system as it is designed again, you will see that the decision-making processes are much simpler. Yeah. So if we are going to say we want to innovate in this way, it is much easier to make that decision.
How does that work in the public sector?
Compared to the public sector, which is still very bureaucratic.
Yeah.
And even though we have told teachers that they can innovate, we have not reoriented the operations of the public sector from what they were in the previous system.
Yeah, I mean, just take us through that. I mean, making a decision to change something or be innovative would require a little bit more, levels of approval, right?
Yes.
A teacher isn't at liberty to do as much.
A teacher is not at liberty to do that much. Yeah. But if you are in a private school, most likely the only person you are referring to is the proprietor of the school. So one level of referral. If you are in a public school system, there are many levels of referral. And that is a challenge in terms of how fast can a teacher then start to innovate. Thirdly, for the teacher in the public school to start to innovate, you have to understand that this same teacher is still being scored on mean score. He's still being assessed on mean score by the Teacher Service Commission. And for that reason, there is very little room to innovate rather than to pursue the familiar path they know that will deliver the mean score they need. And I think that is one of the challenges that we still have, that we're implementing a good system, but we are implementing it, I can say badly, because we are not reorienting the ecosystem within which we need to implement that system.
Interesting that you're saying that, mean score, obviously something that CBC was trying to get away from, like, moving away from the fixation on a final grade or a mean score. So is it implementing, CBC with an old mindset of the 844
Yes,
system?
we are implementing CBC. We are putting new wine in old wine skins. Why? Because we are already in the process of transition, moving away from 844 to the CBC. But look at how we are releasing our national examinations. Look at how we are administering them. Yeah, is the continuation of the old system of where the exam is life and death. How likely is it that come December this year, we'll be able to switch from that mindset suddenly and switch every actor from that mindset? It's difficult. We should be right now in transition mode, starting to lay less and less emphasis on exam, and starting to show the way that exam is no longer what drives learning. It's not the reason the teacher goes to class. But we are not there yet. Yeah,
and we're still ranking the students, and still doing that. And perhaps it would also be something that helps psychologically, right, with the Kenyan public to understand that we're moving into a different space. Mudeu, you are, the former chairperson of the Kenya Private Schools Association. I don't want you to speak on behalf of the association, but being a player in that sector, is this anecdotal? Is this true that there's perhaps a bigger move towards the private sector with CBC, much like what we saw in 2003 during the implementation of free primary education by the then President Kibaki administration? Is this something that you are witnessing in the sector, that many people are perhaps moving into private sector?
Our population is growing. That is, I think, the bottom line here. And public infrastructure has always struggled to keep up with the population. This is nothing new. But allow me just to touch on something that was said before. I think we have misunderstood what CBC aims to do, and we are using our 844 mindsets to understand CBC. We are not the sector, the entire sector, and I have worked with both public and private, the entire sector has switched over. And what you're seeing yesterday and today is a celebration and release of results in the 844 style that has been going on. This has nothing to do with CBC. We have been doing CBS, we have been doing assessments for CBC, and nobody has had anything about it. We have been doing them every year. Grade 3s do their CBS, grade 4s have done their CBS, grade 5s have just finished their CBS. And there's been no noise about it. That tells you something. That tells you that Kenyans and parents within the CBC have actually begun to understand how assessment in CBC is going on. It is the parents with kids in 844 who are struggling to understand what is that about. So I think I want to clarify that CBC has been happening, the assessments have been happening at a national level, and you're not hearing this furore that you hear with 844, where only the winners are celebrated and then, you know, the mad rush after that for schools. CBC assessments have been going on. National assessments have been going on, and they have been going on as designed.
Okay.
Really want to emphasize that we've not been celebrating enough. So back to your question on whether there's a prominence of private sector. Government has done a phenomenal job with free education, a phenomenal job. I want to agree with I think it was Emmanuel who said that, you know, that gap seems to be growing. But what it is that it's just moving with the population growth, because I think the government has actually done a pretty good job in trying to increase drastically the infrastructure available. Most of private schools, I need to emphasize this, are actually informal schools, meaning that they are in settlements, in places where that needs to be emphasized so that we don't cloud what the private sector actually looks like. We have a fixed mental picture of what the majority of private schools look like. What we are portraying here is that the majority of, you know, if we went down to the ground, which has actually been done, when you look at a place like Kibera that has 144 private schools, primary schools, these are all informal schools dealing with kids who physically cannot fit into the government schools that exist. So there is a need for, you know, for us all to figure out how best to run the education sector, but we couldn't do it without the private.
Yeah, okay. All right. Madeo, yeah, I'll stop you there for a moment. Apologies for the break in the signal. But then, you know, she's talking about a rise in informal schools. In the private sector, in many areas where perhaps, you know, public schools are not available for those who are disadvantaged. And so that brings me to my question. Is CBC widening the gap then between the rich and the poor, Dr. Mugo?
I think it's yes and no, but a lot of caution is needed because the CBC curriculum is placing a lot of emphasis on how the teacher perceives their new role as a facilitator, not as a frontal deliverer. You know, previously a teacher would come to class armed with this token of knowledge and they dish out to students, and those that can get it proceed, and those that can't get it remain where they are. CBC is a way of facilitating. So if there are schools that are placing emphasis, and we have seen a lot of difference in schools where there's a head teacher who has owned this and has invested in, even in training their own teachers and them sharing or going to the neighboring school to see what's happening and them coming to implement. So it is dependent on a lot of agency at the local level, unlike the previous curriculum. So schools that just want to stay there, the children in those schools then within the CBC framework are victims and are likely to lag behind. The same thing for the home environment and the support that ought to come from a home to support learning. A lot of CBC is creating the connection between the community and the school and busting the walls that exist between the school as a formal environment and the home as an informal environment for learning. And the parental support, that children come and they continue learning at home, not like previously, where a child crosses the gate of the school or the fence only with the homework on them and nothing else to continue learning. So parents, again, who are more concerned and who invest more in understanding and supporting their children, those children are likely to move. And those parents that have either no time or have no clue or don't want to support, then their children will lag behind. But also, I think, as Emmanuel said, things like wealth, if we don't take caution, then children of poorer backgrounds and less educated parents are likely to lag behind further. And so the question is, if CBC is so much dependent on parental support and parental agency, then what do we do with parents who never went to school themselves?
Right.
How do we convince them that they also have a big role to play in supporting their children to learn? So I think we need a more differentiated approach, but also reaching every parent and every teacher to understand what their role is and be able to dispense those roles meaningfully. Otherwise, those that are behind might lag behind even further, and those that are moving might move faster.
Yeah, Dr. Manyasa, you've done a study on this, right? On CBC, its implementation across the economic spectrum. Tell us about your findings.
Several things that we found. One, that children from households that are wealthier are doing better in terms of being able to read with comprehension and being able to solve basic numeracy problems. That children of mothers with a college education are 3 times much more likely to solve their problems in school compared to those with mothers without formal education. We also saw that the teacher-to-classroom ratio is one of the most critical factors affecting the learning outcomes. Government has been posting teachers based on pupil-to-teacher ratio. Now, let me tell you how that is faulty. That has worked everywhere else, and is the international standard of measuring improvement in the ratio of teachers in schools. But it presumes that there is a teacher, first of all, in the class. And then you look at how many learners is that teacher attending to. But if you use that on a whole school, if you have a school with 100 children who are scattered from grade 1 to 8, and you give them 5 teachers, you know that pupil-to-teacher ratio is 20:1, which is a very, very good ratio. But when all these teachers are in class, there will be still classes without teachers in that school. So there will be children missing lessons. And unlike if you have 500 children in a school and you give them 10 teachers, or you give and you have 50 children per teacher, and those teachers are able to attend all the classes.
Okay, Dr. Manyasa, wouldn't that be said of any system really? CBC, 844, whatever system it is, that those who are, wealthier, would have better outcomes than those who are disadvantaged. What about that is peculiar to CBC?
What is peculiar to CBC is this, that, and I want to refer to what John said, there is a very high risk. It is a risk. The system is not designed to widen these gaps, but there is a risk if we don't do certain things right. That we have told teachers to innovate. Yes, they will innovate. Within which environment? One teacher is innovating in Nairobi, in a formal settlement. They are leading their children to looking at computers and doing solving certain problems using the computer. Another teacher is innovating in a very impoverished environment, and all they can send their children to work with is some of the things that people consider overtaken by time. That is a major risk, even as we allow teachers to innovate and work with what is locally available, because these children don't have access to same things. And in the end, these children are learning to compete to be global citizens in a common environment. later on in life, after having been allowed to focus on what exists where they are. That is the risk, and that is the risk that we need to sort out. And to me, the biggest shortfall of what we have in the implementation of CBC is that we don't have a standing committee. We need a standing committee whose mandate will be to troubleshoot all the challenges that we come across in implementation of CBC, and one that will last until the first CBC class graduates from university.
I see.
Because we are new to this system.
Yeah.
We are going to come across problems at every level.
Absolutely.
We need someone, we need a committee that has stakeholders that keeps reviewing the implementation process as we go, and keeps troubleshooting the problems that emerge as we go along.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective, a standing committee to just look at the implementation every step of the way until the first one graduates all the way in university. We have a text message here from Wilson Sossion, who's a nominated member of parliament and former union leader. And this is what he has to say. He's disagreeing with you, Dr. Mugo. He says 86% of teachers approve CBC from Dr. Mugo is indeed a lie. What we are getting is the converse. Changing education structure and curriculum haphazardly is a mistake that Kenyans will regret. We need verifiable data on CBC and not spurious data delivered as statements. That is what his SMS goes on to say, and he says it was intended to cripple public schools, to widen the gates for privatization as a new business frontier. I believe that, yes, we've gone through the text. Yes, we talked about the fact, this is what Sossion says, that we need more verifiable data on CBC. He's actually called in to the discussion to weigh in a little bit more. Some rather strong statements from you, Wilson. You're saying that this is a system that's very deliberately designed to cripple the public sector?
Yes, thank you, Ivan. And a person of Dr. Mugo's stature is completely aware, I'm sure, about what is happening globally, and the introduction of CBC in Kenya indeed was very haphazard, and you were cheated that it was a homegrown curriculum system, while it is a cut and paste externally, and it was brought purposely to exacerbate inequality and to cripple public schools in order to promote the new frontier of business in the privatization of education. And it doesn't surprise me when you see Mudeu Kasanga so excited about CBC, while we know it is not working in public schools. The fact of the matter is we are talking about CBC as an high-order education system that has been implemented by very strong economies. When are we going to create classrooms and reduce class sizes to less than 20 or 25 at most in our public schools and avail at least 3 teachers in every teaching and learning lesson? This is the worst form of experimentation on citizens, and in fact, I would say it borders on ceding the sovereignty of our country, because you allow outsiders through the back door to mess up our education system at will, and then we come out gloriously to defend and theorize on how it's going to be good for the people, while we know it's widening the inequality gap. I challenge Dr. Mugo to give us verifiable data that at least 86% of teachers are approving the CBC, while we know already there's a lot of resistance and things are not working right on the ground. The designs were not worked out properly. Okay. Even the universities are not prepared. In an ideal curriculum reform system where it's done professionally, in fact, we would be getting a lot of studies and research reports from the universities and experts, but in this circumstance, we are not getting. But I dare say, and I still say, yes, it was wrong for the president and head of state of this government to allow a process that is going to ruin our education system. And you see, we cannot talk of even double intake in our high school system when you are not sure where to domicile the mid, the lower secondary. And today we are told 10,000 classrooms will be delivered by July. CBC is not about delivering one classrooms, but it's about looking at the entire framework. The whole process is being handled very wrongly, and very soon our education system will be in a mess. And that is why the next president of the Republic of Kenya, upon being sworn in, should be able to reconstitute a committee to review and reform the current reforms so that we can save this country from education accidents and experimentation, and to stop external business entities from invading the Kenyan territory and using our children in business. That is the stark reality.
Sossion, I want to ask you this because you've gone into the next question I was going to ask you. You talk of reconstituting a committee to review the rollout of this. You know, what options exist for us now? We've done 6 years of CBC, about to do the 7th now. There's 8 million learners who are on the program, 1 million going to join in PP1. You know, what can we possibly do if you say, you know, this is not working? What options exist?
No, there are many options, and we must bite the silver bullet on this. Kenya must conform to the UN resolution of the Sustainable Development Agenda goals of equitable quality education for all. We must protect equity. And while protecting equity, we must protect our public school system, and therefore there will be need to sanitize our education system and the reforms that are in place. And I would like to tell Kenyans that in reality, there has been no CBC that has been implemented in our school system. The children up to grade 6 are still being taught under the previous pedagogical approach of the outcome-based curriculum. We can't do away with the knowledge-based curriculum. And even if we want to bring in a new education system, we load it on the existing curriculum. You just can't scrap and bring in a new education system. And if we were to introduce the 21st century skills, which are very ideal, we would do so within the existing education system without changing the structure, which would, of course, would be very costly. We shall have the commission, not just a committee, the commission, education commission, that must be appointed. We'll have to look at the economics of CBC, the sustainability, and how to integrate new aspects of learning the 21st century skills within the existing structure. So there would be absolutely nothing wrong with extending primary education cycle maybe up to grade 7 or 8, and we must not necessarily go by what has been done by the previous government. If a commission that engages in thorough and extensive public consultation comes out with recommendations that are accepted by majority of Kenyans, then that should carry the day. We must allow a wider space of democracy in dealing with our education system. And if we have to change our education system, probably it is time we even put it on a referendum and do a thorough public civic education and do things right. We cannot hijack the power of the people by allowing a few technocrats and a few outsiders to hijack our education system and even at work, cede our sovereignty and use our children for business.
Okay. Sossion, just hang on a second because I'd like to get some reactions from my guests. But I'll come to you, Dr. Mugo, in just a moment. Mutheo has been quiet, hanging in the wings, perhaps to respond to some of the things that Wilson Sossion, the nominated Member of Parliament, has said, basically saying there isn't much to celebrate, at least not even from the private sector in which you serve.
The Teacher Service Commission has been consistently for the last 4 years training teachers across the country. The statistics are there. CBC has been rolled out, whether we like it or not. And the acceptance levels are what Dr. Mugo has given. Those are the current statistics on the ground. Whatever else statistics that Mheshimiwa has there, he should share with us and tell us where he's getting them from, so that at least we can get to do what needs to be done. Children are already learning, they are in the system, And we know, like Dr. Mugo has said, that we are fixing past problems. This system is fixing past problems. We live in a world where we are not, we have to prepare our children for this 21st century that we are already in. And I believe, and I firmly believe, this is for me, I totally believe that this is the right way to go about it, that we needed this change about, that we needed to move away from a knowledge-based curriculum. And evidence is just the beginning of this discussion, where we talked about how the things that we can see are going wrong, even as we release these results. And like I said, I want to reemphasize, there are quiet successes that are going on in CBC that need to be amplified so that we can all at least agree that this is what is going on. And I believe that more public school teachers need to speak up and celebrate the successes. We are seeing them as we do the assessments from inside. As we sit in the inside, we are seeing the challenges that, some of these challenges that perhaps even I acknowledge that Mheshimiwa is seeing. We are very diverse socially, and we do need to keep working on equity. This is on the table. It is already being done. Government is already building more and more classes to try and balance out this. TSC is constant, is got the, not TSC, the Ministry of Education does have the biggest budget in the government. So this is already on the table, that there is more that needs to be done on education. But scrapping it and destroying a whole generation, I think that is a very wrong mistake. And I think Mheshimiwa is going way beyond the call of a citizen to speak like that when already 8 million children are there. We need to be rational about this and understand the direction that we are headed to, and leave out the political rhetoric around CBC and focus on what is actually going on. We on the inside are seeing the successes, and we are not exaggerating these successes. They are there. We have been doing CBS, and we are seeing the differences in the literacy countrywide. This is data available from NEC, from all these other players in education. This is publicly available data that is showing that CBC assessments are actually pushing up literacy rates across the spectrum. Okay. In both public and private schools. So I don't know what more to say. I'm speaking from an insider, somebody actually practicing this CBC, not from a political angle. Okay. So I really can't quite argue politically, but from an insider's point of view, the successes are there. Okay, they need to be amplified so that we can all get on board. Thank you, Yvonne.
All right, thanks, Matteo. I just want Dr. Mugo to jump in, and then I want us to focus on the next issue, which is the transition that's coming up. You'd like to respond? Yeah,
I think first is to appreciate Honorable Sossion for being engaged a lot about this. Of course, research can only be disproved by research, not by opinion. So I would appreciate if Honorable Sossion can table the references that he has. I have mine. I have no interest other than the child. So I think it's important we be sober in discussing this issue and put the child first. Because claiming that the education we had before this was better than CBC, I think it's being dishonest about ourselves. Because if there is anything that hijacked the education of the child, is that which concentrated on the success of 10% and ignored 90%. I think that's the largest felony that has happened in our history. And I can remind Sossion that in the June of 2012, we were together at KICC. That was the first time we discussed this at a national level, in a national conference. And I stood and spoke because I am one person annoyed by a system that favors a few and that tries to push everyone into one small hole of intellectualism. And we know that we are gifted differently. So any education that ignores that we learn differently, there are those that learn in a different way and others, and that we won't all fit in academia, then I think that's a very bad system. Then the second thing that hijacked education for our children is a mean score. And this is what we saw yesterday. Why should you rank children I mean, if we are to rank children, then we have to use all the multiplicity of giftedness that each of us has been given by God to rank us. Let's rank the academics, we rank the sports, we rank the arts, we rank the language, we rank children based on all this, because every child scores something. But when we try only to focus on academics, and then rote learning, and what we have been seeing happening in our classrooms and teaching for the test. So in that meeting of 2012, somebody told me that I was actually opposing an education, and yet I was a very good product of that education. I told them I started class 1 with 84 other children. Only 2 of us finished in time. I'm the only one who went to the university out of the 84. If I am to be, if that curriculum is to be judged against Mogo, then you are just looking at the success of 5% of us actually survivors of a bad system. Okay. And you can't use that to judge a system. Okay. So I think it is important we be sober. We look at CBC has challenges, but I think you don't correct one wrong by another. We look at how to fix the challenges that are facing the system so that we move forward for our children. Okay,
one of the things I want us to take a look at going forward is the transition that we have spoken about into junior secondary school. Dr. Manyasa, what do you see as that transition? What does it look like it'll be for you based on everything? I mean, surely rolling out a new curriculum, at least part of it, I mean, it's been running for 6 years, but for 2 of those 6 years, it's been a pandemic, an accelerated, packed schedule that we see happening. Are we ready for that major transition? A cabinet secretary is saying 10,000 classrooms will be ready by July. That's just about 2-3 months from now. Are we ready for that major transition of CBC?
We must get into that transition. We don't have a choice. But I think we made some mistakes in the beginning when we rushed the process. So if we are still working on classrooms right now, we need to appreciate that beyond classrooms, we need teachers. How much has been set aside for the recruitment of teachers? If you look at what the TSA has been given this year is to recruit 5,000 teachers for both primary and secondary. 5,000 teachers, that replaces those who have left the service in the year. From death, from retirement, from those who have quit to go and do other business. It doesn't increase the number of teachers. And so if we are moving into this double intake, we need to be looking at that. And that's why I take a bit of offense when Mheshimiwa Sossion starts insinuating that someone will scrap this system. Because that takes our eyes off the ball. And convinces some people in this country that let's not try to figure out solutions to the impending crisis, because there will be no crisis. We will scrap CBC, there will be no double intake. The double intake is certain to come at the end of this year. Yeah. So we have challenges that we must confront. And those challenges include asking ourselves, what are we going to do to ensure that we have teachers to teach double intake? How soon can we prepare those teachers? I have seen TSA has said they are going to train 60,000 teachers from 25th of this, from some date, I think early early May. But schools are reopening earlier than that, April, so I don't know if those teachers will skip school for the 2 weeks, given that the whole term is about 10 weeks. So we have those issues. And in a way, I want to fault our topmost policymakers in the ministry in the sense that I think they are deploying their energies in the wrong place. They are deploying their energies in practical, operational tasks. And the ministry is lacking strategic leadership that they should be providing. Because this is a major challenge that we must confront. It's something that we have no choice about. The double intake must happen, and the preparation is inadequate. Okay,
there's also the challenge of where the junior secondary will be domiciled, Dr. Mugo. Is it in current primary schools, or is it in high schools, and how people exactly transit, from the from primary to junior secondary school. That's a bit of a sticking point, right?
Yeah, I think I'm not even clear myself.
Yeah.
And I think if I don't understand it myself, then there are many Kenyans who don't, like me. And of course, the better option, in my opinion, would have been to domicile this in the primary school, because then we would not have been forced to do two things that we are doing now. One is sticking a lot of money in building classes when we should be investing in teachers. Because given the choice between children in a very nice classroom without a teacher seated there on nice desks, and a teacher who is well motivated teaching under a tree, we know what would go for. Yeah. So I think it has forced us to put money in a brick and mortar, money that is not enough even to do teacher training.
But if we have a teacher's shortage of 100,000, 104,000.
Yeah, and I think the crisis is becoming worse and worse.
Yeah.
And you see TSC doesn't have enough money to hire. And when you look now at the double intake, for instance, like imagine the junior secondary, the way now the curriculum is fitted, is a highly demanding 3 years.
Yes.
Because these are going to be 3 intensive years of the teacher working with the child and the parent to check what gift there is and test the promotion of it, so that when now they are going to the senior secondary, they are able to place them well.
Yeah.
Now, when this child comes from Mandera to Alliance, because that's now what the decision we have taken, when is that parent in Mandera going to work with the teacher and the child to make decisions over only 3 years about the child's future? So I think, in my opinion, we committed felony because also we are going to stick much younger children in boarding schools. So this, imagine, Yvonne, from what we had yesterday from the CS, I think it's 33,000 of them that took KCPE were aged 12 years and under, meaning they were 4 years in class 1, if you do the math. Now, imagine now a grade 7 child in Kenya High School. They are going to be now 10 years. If we are to apply the same scale, we'll have a 40,000 that are 10 years and have to be stuck, withdrawn from parents, and stuck in Kenya High and other boarding schools, because that's where we think they'll get a better mean score, and ignore the future of these children and the future of society. So I think there are things that are fundamentally wrong. I think they are wrong decisions. But because it's what we have decided, I think it's just to see how best.
But how do we fix that? Yeah, because you said it's up to us to see how we sort that out. So what do we do now? Because you have a child from primary school to junior secondary, they might not get a junior secondary school within their area. So a child in Garissa or a child in Kakamega or in Kilifi, might then get sent to a junior secondary school that is, very far away from home, and they're at a much younger age, because there might not be enough junior secondary schools within their vicinity or their county. Dr. Manyasa, so what happens now? How do we fix that?
This is why I feel that we have lacked strategic leadership. Lacked strategic leadership because it was supposed to grapple with these questions before advising the president to pronounce himself on the issue of junior secondary will be domiciled in secondary school. Junior secondary will do very well in primary school, because there are a lot of parents who have gone out there and pushed the children into school very early. So we have a lot of underage children. In the survey that we did last year, we had 4-year-olds in class 1, we had 5-year-olds in class 2, in grade 2, sorry. These kids are going to be in grade 6 when they are 10. And when they are taken to a secondary school, that is going to be a problem. I've had pronouncements to the effect that some primary schools may be allowed to host secondary school, junior secondary.
Yeah.
That is fine. However, this late in the day, we need to already have drawn guidelines that says for a primary school to host junior secondary, it will need to meet these conditions. It will need to have this caliber of teachers. And this is how that school is going to be run. There has been stories in the media about how those primary schools will have 2 boards of management. And the question then begs, So the head teacher reports to two separate boards of management. How will capitation be determined? So I think there's a problem there, but I think that is one more reason why we need a team that keeps looking at these problems and troubleshooting them. So that we know if in 2023 we have this double intake, and this double intake brings out certain major challenges, in 2024 we don't go for the double intake, we keep those children in primary schools.
Okay.
So that junior secondary then is in primary school.
Is in primary school.
It is still reversible to keep it in primary schools. All we need is to work out the modalities under which that will happen.
I see. Okay, so some interesting thoughts that are coming out there. Mudeu, I have not forgotten you. I'll be coming back to you in a moment. But I'd like to just bring up the issue of funding and capitation, because that's also, a big one. Dr. Manyasa, you have some interesting thoughts on this, particularly with the private schools, many of them in informal settlements. Do they receive the same type of funding that, should ideally be universal, one would imagine, to all, whether you're in private or public schools?
Because we have committed to say we want to give every Kenyan child basic education as a right. If you go to most of our informal settlements, there are no public schools, and if there are too few to meet the demand. So a lot of low-cost private schools have emerged there. There is absolutely no logic that you give a school like Westlands Primary, like Limani Primary, public schools that are in well-to-do areas, capitation by government, and not give that informal settlement in Mukuru Kwanjenga, that private, low-cost private school in Mukuru Kwanjenga, capitation. I think that the model we use for capitation is flawed, and we need to sort that out so that we can give money to the children who need it, regardless of whether they're in a public or private school. Second, I think that we don't need to give every child capitation, and this goes up to university. I have seen these problems. You have a child who goes to very high-cost primary school, very high-cost secondary school where they pay 300,000-400,000 per term, and then they get an A, and they are admitted under the under job, as we call it, and suddenly they have qualified for government subsidy. Why? When the fees in the university is lower than what they have been paying in primary and in secondary school. Why? We have not targeted. Government has invested a lot in the education sector, but we have not targeted the funds to those who need it. And I think that we have been lazy. We haven't wanted to apply our minds to figuring out how to make sure that the scarce resource we are putting in this sector is targeted to those who need it.
Yeah, if indeed we say education is universal and it's for all children. Mudeu, is this something you agree with in the private sector, funding to be done equally, private sector versus the public school education system?
Where we are, I want to agree with Emmanuel that if we are to really achieve access to education in the quickest manner, we do need to look at capitation. And we do need to make sure that it follows a child rather than an institution or a type of institution. As long as this child is Kenyan, then they have certain rights that have been given to them by our constitution. I do agree with Emmanuel on that we need to look at it and figure out how best to that all Kenyans can then enjoy the access to education that the Constitution of Kenya guarantees them. On the question of junior secondary, this is an important discussion that we need to have. 72% of Kenyan secondary going children actually do attend day schools, meaning they go to a school near them. That is what a day school means. They don't sleep in that school. 72%. But because of the nature of 844 and the fact that we tend to celebrate just the kids who do extremely well, all this discussion of secondary schooling seems to focus on the 28% of students who attend boarding schools and the demand thereof that is created by this extreme focus on these boarding schools. The boarding schools, therefore, as a result, have tended to have a lot more infrastructure because the system has ended up being selective and therefore very inequitable, that you need to, not anyone can just access, and this is what I think Dr. Mugo was trying to say in 2012, where we have a system that literally wastes generations upon generations of children because of its very nature. This is what now the junior secondary school is trying to do here, and I think we need to look at it from that perspective. That 72% of our current secondary school-going children actually do attend to day schools. That we need to turn our eyes away from these boarding schools that only accommodate 28% and turn them back to these day schools that have been there, ignored. Yet the model itself has proved to be successful. We in the private sector do know this for a fact, that day schools work, that they keep kids more engaged within their families, that half the issues we are seeing in our boarding schools simply do not exist in our day schools, be they public or private. And we have extremely successful day schools. But the general narrative, because KCP is used, and I've said this before, is used like a massive interview to just slot kids into schools based on academic performance, based on the performance of that particular exam. We have then turned our eye away from the majority and focused on the very small minority of schools. And we keep, throwing even more money at them, yet the numbers of kids who go into these schools are not increasing. I'm hoping that this move to put junior secondary in a secondary school, which to me is the right thing, putting junior secondary in a primary school without following it with secondary school trained teachers is a zero-sum game and sort of may not cater for, unless we change the teacher training for primary school teachers to teach teenagers and things like that. Mm-hmm. This COVID has also taught us a few precious lessons, given that the children are slightly older than primary school teachers are normally used to dealing with, and can be perhaps used. I think some research needs to be done there on how primary schools coped with the extra few age differences within, just because of the COVID delays. But we need to just emphasize that the majority of our children do go to day school.
Okay.
And we need to remember that as we discuss CBC and this transition, that already a majority of our kids are in day school, not in boarding school, 72%.
Okay, already in day schools. I think we want to start taking a look at final comments. There's quite a few, tweets that are coming in, and we'll get to that in a moment. But maybe just some final thoughts, as we close, and some of those will be some final questions. We'll talk about universities and whether they're ready. We've heard some of the university dons saying, we haven't gotten there yet. Maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, or maybe that's something we should already start thinking about. Dr. Mugo, so, what happens? What are some of those key things? How do we sort them out, by when, to make sure that at least by 2023, when we resume the academic calendar as we've always known it, and when we have the double intake, that, we've averted quite a bit of the challenges that we've, set out here today?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. If the university is waiting for 2026, to change in 2026 when they receive this new generation of learners, then they already have failed.
But don't they need to be engaged, though?
In fact, the way to reform the education, the right approach would have been to start by reforming the university and work backwards. Because the question of reforming education relevance is what kind of a graduate do we want to create out of the pipeline? And when you have a clear figure of that 19-year-old and what skills and competencies they should have, then you start by the end coming all the way to the beginning. So I think the approach we took of a face in, face out, yes, but the other upper parts should also have been changing. I don't understand why the secondary school now has not changed, because why are we sacrificing the generation of those? Like imagine the child who will be in class 7 or class 8. They are condemned now to this system all through up to the end. And the one who is just here behind them is now the one enjoying the privilege. I think there should have been change. Incremental change at all level, even the university, so that all of us are walking that journey, not just the CBC, but there are those minimums that must change even in the way we instruct the 7 million that are now still within the old curriculum. So I think the university needs to be engaged. It needs to change now, not in 2026, because even those students that are undergoing in the university now are going to suffer the same things we are claiming now. So why can't the university now change, reform now, in readiness, not in readiness for CBC, but to benefit those that are in the universities now. I think change cannot wait. Children's lives cannot wait, and we cannot sacrifice them because of this politics. The one thing I think we are still hanging, as Emmanuel said, the old wineskins. While 28% are in boarding schools, I agree, but they are the ones who are favored. Why should the same government have a national school that receives a lot of capitation money, yet they already have the infrastructure? And the day school, and I know less than 10% have a choice to go to the day school. So that 72% is not out of choice. So I think the first thing must be to disband the national school. We are carrying on the colonial system, those white schools and the Asian schools and the African schools. We are condoning that now, when we should actually have all government schools looking the same. And I think we cannot speak equity if there is no equitable quality across government schools.
Okay. Dr. Manyasa, your final comments?
Thank you. Three things I need to say, maybe 4 quick ones. The first is to just emphasize what John has said. Our national schools educate less than 5% of the children. They have a lot of resources. Nairobi school year has 1,000 acres of land. And when you look at the day schools that Madam Kasanga is referring to, many of them are places children are going to grow. They constitute the 60-something% of Form 4 who score D+ and below. They are not learning there because there are no resources, there are no teachers, there are no facilities, there are no labs. Children are growing in those day schools, many of them, because we haven't given a definition of what a secondary school should look like. It varies from this Nairobi school on 1,000 acres of land to some 3-4 structures of mabatis with a head teacher and a few teachers being called a secondary school. We need to standardize schools. I think that cannot be overemphasized. The second thing that I need to speak to is the issue of CBA. I have heard Madam Kasanga mention that a lot. We need to do an audit before we get to the end of this year, to be sure that the marks that teachers have been entering into the system are reliable, because they are going to account for the final score. Why am I saying this? Because the reason we administer exams, national exams with guns all over the place, is to protect the invigilator from undue influence and harassment by people who may want them to give children space to steal the exam. Now you have a teacher who is living in those communities unprotected by anybody, and they are supposed to be contributing to what is going to go into the national score of the learner at the end of the day. How safe are they from manipulation? That is important to consider. We need to audit these results that are online right now. The third thing that I think is important, we need to implement the Basic Education Act in full. It provides for establishment of a national education board. That national education board does not exist. It was initially established by Professor Kaimenyi, and when the term of that board ended, a new one was never set up. Now we have county education boards that just hang in the air. They're supposed to be reporting to a national education board. And I think that some of the challenges we are facing in the education sector could be very well tackled by that national education board. I think we should set it up. It is in the law.
Okay.
Thank you.
Before I go to Matteo, Cabinet Secretary Magoha said that, his successor will find a good foundation that has already been laid in place for CBC. Do you agree?
I don't know. I don't know what his successor find. I'm sure he knows more than I.
That's a safe answer, Dr. Manyasa. I see where you're going with that. Let me try and pose that to Mudeo. Has Cabinet Secretary Magoha laid in place a good foundation for his successor who will come after the general election? As you close.
Looking at his track record from the time he was the chair of Kenya National Examination Council, I want to give him a very high score for putting back faith in the exam system in Kenya. It looks rough for many people looking in. It looks very, very tough, but it has put back sanity in the secondary schooling and exam systems especially, and reduced drastically the cheating that used to happen in the primary school section as well. So for me, I think he's done the right thing, and he was in many ways the right person at the right time. At NEC, the right person at the right time in the Ministry of Education, especially that one thing of setting up the State Department for CBC, which has already done audits, which has already, already doing all the work that some of the issues that we've done now, just to see through the implementation of CBC, and as we head towards the transition and moving on forward. So for me, sitting where I am, I give him very high. I score him very, very, very high. Given that we had worked on CBC with previous cabinet secretaries and seen the start-stops from 2013 and that sort of thing. So a very high score.
Okay.
My final remarks.
Yes, go ahead.
I want to congratulate all KCP candidates, all of them, and to just remind them that there is a 100% transition policy in Kenya, which is one of the things we should be celebrating, I think, that every child, no matter what they scored, actually do have a school that they can go to. What I want to agree with the other panelists is that now we need to figure out how we can break down that ranking, because these kids are in primary schools where there's let me call it their mixed ability. Like you sit with a kid who scores 400, you sit with another who scores a lot less than that, and you're all learning quite happily. But suddenly in secondary school, it's not okay to be in a mixed, ability class, which is really where the issues of equity and sometimes even now access come in, because kids do drop off of school because of these differences in resourcing. So we need to put in a lot of efforts in resourcing all our schools so that we can assure every child of quality education, no matter where they go. And as we go into CBC and as we go into bringing back technical subjects into the education curriculum across the board, it will mean a lot of effort from the two main stakeholders, which is the Teacher Service Commission and the private sector, to ensure that teachers are capacity built to effectively roll out the next phase of CBC. Thank you so much, Yvonne. It's been a pleasure being here with you today.
Thank you, Mudeo Kasanga, for your time here on Newsnight tonight. Asante sana for your thoughts. You are scoring Professor Magoha rather highly. Maybe it's a mixed bag, at least if our panel is anything to go by, including the phone call that we had with Wilson Sossion, who's a nominated member of Parliament, who called in with his views. We thank him as well for calling in and sharing his views with us. Thanks as well to Dr. Mugo, Dr. Manyasa. Asanteni sana for your time here. But before we leave, let's get into some of the feedback that's coming in regarding the conversation. Quite a bit of it now. Many of your tweets regarding this issue of CBC. I don't know which one we can start with. There we go. Engineer Lazaro Kanyambok says the transfer of teachers and understaffing are some of the challenges facing public schools. And then here's another tweet from Kevin. Kevin Ombagi says, inadequate infrastructure and lack of trained personnel, that's teachers, are the major problems facing the CBC implementation. And yet another one here from Alex Owiti says, 8 for 4 produced the best skills I have seen in music, home science, art and craft, mechanics, and many more. CBC is a concoction of many other curricula. We are lost in the forest and we don't have a proper path. CBC is good on paper. And then there is another one from Gishuki wa Kamau, who says, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The issue of grading is still there, even in those classes that are officially under CBC. Just ask for the position of your kid and you'll get under the table. Private schools are doing it, and I guess they do it to grade students. That is grade 1 read, okay. And then Engineer Lazaro, once again, I think it's a continuation of the message he had before, where it says the government should not have initiated any changes in the education sector before thorough consultation with the stakeholders. So once again, the issue of public participation coming up in the views there. Pascalo Pio3 says to Dr. Manyasa, thank you for being an honest educationist. You've chosen the less followed road on CBC. Why leaders refuse to listen to you is appalling, Dr. Manyasa. Maybe it should be Dr. Manyasa for CS after August 9th. And he's waving that off. Richard Sijenyi says, the challenge of age of transition to junior secondary is an opportunity for development of children via adaptation. The focus or solution should be to provide for safety and homeliness at schools. Let's not cry over challenges. Let's focus more on solutions. And another one, I believe that's been quite a talking point. At Katebes K says, I agree with the panelists on the wrong approach to domicile the CBC class in high school. These kids are too young to mingle with overgrown teens. Okay. And finally, from Orutwa Sam says, CBC is in its crawling stage. Very normal. Give it time. It shall be able to walk with time. And that is how it happens in every country. The outgoing systems have put many brains to waste. Oh, I think we have time for one more. Let's get that in. And this is from Okelo Malimu. Says, whereas the Ministry of Education has tried as far as implementation of CBC is concerned, more needs to be done. We require more training sessions for teachers. The cost of CBC must be reduced to ease pressure on parents. More classrooms are needed. More teachers must be employed. And on and on. So those are the views. Mixed bag, obviously. Some believing the implementation could have been done better. Lots of, suggestions we've heard tonight from you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time. It's something we definitely must continue to discuss as we go. The children are on a break. I believe it's, 6 weeks left on that holiday break. There's another, 6 to go by April. The academic year 2022 officially begins, and it ends in November, when we shall see another KCP, KCSE. Remember, there's also the continuous based assessment that carries on, and then there's that big transition that's happening at the end of the year into junior secondary school. We'll continue to have discussions such as these. Thank you for watching here on Newsnight. Thank you for being kind to me while I sit in for Wahiga Maura, who's away this week. We shall see you again sometime this week. Yeah, we'll be back on Thursday. Yeah, it's a big day, and we'll tell you all about it on that day. Thanks for watching. My name is Yvonne Okwara Matole. Have a good night. God bless you all. Bye-bye.